They say the West is cruel to women. I reckon they're right. The day my father sold me to a drunken outlaw was the day I stopped being a girl and started surviving. The wind kicked up dust across the parched earth as I knelt in the garden, tugging weeds from rows that hadn't seen rain in weeks. My fingers were blistered, nails caked in dirt, and sweat carved lines through the dust on my cheeks. I wiped my brow with the back of my wrist and sat back on my heels. The sun was high. That meant Pa was likely halfway through his second bottle already. The cabin sat crooked on the edge of our claim, boards warped, the roof slanted like it too, was tired of holding itself together. Smoke curled from the chimney, even though it was hot enough to fry eggs on stone. I kept weeding. The soil cracked and pulled apart like skin too dry to heal. I thought of Mama, how she used to kneel beside me in this same dirt, singing low while we worked. Her voice had vanished 3 winters ago when the fever came through and stole her breath away in a single night. That left me and Pa. Or, more truthfully, just me. The crunch of hooves startled me. I stood, brushing off my apron, heart already sinking. We didn't get visitors, not the good kind, anyway. The horse crested the rise first, then the rider. A hulking man slouched in the saddle, like a sack of potatoes soaked in whiskey. He wore a battered duster that flapped in the wind, and a red kerchief around his neck, stained with something darker than dust. Even from a distance, I could smell him. Flies buzzed near his shoulders. He stopped in front of the cabin and slid down, boots thudding heavy. I stayed put, hidden half behind the withered corn rows, peering through the dry stalks. My stomach twisted. Reed Banner. He wasn't from around here, but everyone within 50 miles had heard of him. A mean bastard with a crooked jaw and a temper quicker than a prairie fire. They said he'd put a bullet in a boy just for whistling near his horse. They said he drank more rotgut than water. They said he was always looking for a woman, but none ever lasted long. Pa stumbled out to meet him, shirt half buttoned, face already flushed with drink. The bottle dangled from his fingers. He squinted up at Reed, who loomed over him like a shadow given flesh. I inched closer, crouching low behind a stump. They talked in low tones, voices barely audible over the wind. I caught words, payment, woman, and Pa's nervous chuckle. My mouth went dry. Reed pulled something from his saddlebag and tossed it at Pa's feet, a bottle, full and sealed. Then came a clinking pouch. Bullets, maybe, or coins. Pa looked down at them, then back up, and he laughed like he hadn't heard a joke in a decade. No, I whispered, hands curling into fists. Reed said something else. Pa nodded. They turned toward the garden. I froze. There she is, Pa slurred, stumbling toward me. Clara, come on now. Don't make a scene. I didn't move. Girl, he barked. Don't make me tell you again. I stood slowly, heart thudding. My legs shook as I stepped from behind the rows, dust swirling around my boots. Reed stared at me with bloodshot eyes, his grin revealing broken teeth, stained yellow. She'll do, he said, and spit on the ground. I stared at Pa. You can't. She's got a roof, he said, voice defensive. Got food. A man to keep her. That's more than most get. He's drunk, I snapped. He reeks. Reed stepped closer. So will you, after a few nights? I slapped him. Silence. The sound of my palm hitting his cheek still rang in my ears when Reed grabbed my wrist hard enough to make me cry out. He twisted it, smiling like pain pleased him. You'll learn, he said. Let go of her, Pa muttered, suddenly uncertain. Reed didn't. She's mine now. Not yet, I said through clenched teeth. I wrenched free and ran. I heard Pa shout, then curse, and Reed bellow behind him. I ran past the dry well, past Mama's grave, and into the woods behind the property, where the trees grew close and the shadows offered a kind of peace the world couldn't steal. Branches whipped at my face, and the roots tried to trip me, but I didn't stop. Not until the sounds faded and my lungs burned, and my legs folded beneath me. I curled up under a pine, shaking. My wrist throbbed. My lip was bleeding. I'd bitten it hard without realizing. Somewhere behind me, 2 men argued. One sold his daughter. The other thought he'd bought a prize. Tears came slow and hot. I wiped them away angrily. Crying didn't help. Mama used to say tears were like rain on the prairie, might soften the dirt, but they didn't plant seeds. I didn't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the sun to dip low and the wind to turn cold. The woods pressed in around me, whispering strange things. I thought of running further, maybe to town, but it was 30 miles and the trail was rough. And if Reed caught me out there alone, the snap of a twig made me jump. I wasn't alone. I held my breath, listening. Another sound, soft, deliberate, too careful for an animal. My eyes scanned the trees, heart pounding. Nothing. But I'd learned the woods enough to know when I was being watched. I stood slowly, muscles aching. I turned a slow circle, hand reaching instinctively for the small knife I kept tied under my apron. The blade was dull, but it was something. Still nothing. The wind picked up again, and with it came a new sound, hoofbeats. I ran. This time, I didn't look back. The forest grew thicker, darker. I stumbled through underbrush, my dress tearing. Blood smeared my shin where a thorn caught me. I didn't care. I couldn't go back. I'd rather freeze out here or be eaten by wolves than belong to that man. Eventually, I reached a ravine. Too wide to jump, too steep to climb down fast. I looked behind me, no sign of them yet. But I knew it was only time. I sank to the ground, gasping. My thoughts churned like a storm. No family, no home, no way out. The world had narrowed down to this: a girl, a knife, and too many men who saw her as something to trade. And then I heard something. Not loud, just a breath. A shift of leaves. I turned, knife raised. A man stood 10 feet away, half hidden in the trees. He wore buckskin, a bow slung over his shoulder, dark hair braided with leather. His face was calm, watchful, not angry, not curious, just still. His eyes met mine. I raised the knife higher. You come any closer. He tilted his head. You'll what? His voice was smooth, low, and without fear. I didn't reply. You're far from safe, he said. I know that. He took one step forward, slow and unthreatening. Who's chasing you? My past, I muttered. And a man who thinks he owns my future. He nodded, like that made perfect sense. I don't need help, I added quickly. I didn't offer any, he replied. That stopped me. We stared at each other in the silence, the wind whistling through the trees. Then he said, don't stay here. The night brings worse things than men. And just like that, he turned and disappeared into the trees. I stood frozen, knife trembling in my hand, unsure what had just passed between us. But I knew this much. Someone had seen me. Not as a thing. Not as a burden. Just seen. And that, more than anything, terrified me. Because it meant I still had something left to lose. The night pressed in like a weight, thick with insects and the whisper of leaves. I hadn't moved from the ravine's edge, too tired, too hollow to try. My knife lay beside me, forgotten, as I watched the shadows shift in the trees. The stranger was gone, but I still felt his presence, like the echo of thunder long after the storm has passed. I didn't sleep. My eyes closed once or twice, but every sound jolted me awake. The hoot of an owl, a twig cracking, my own heartbeat slamming in my chest. When dawn finally bled into the sky, the woods turned to pale gold, and the world softened just enough for me to stand. My dress was ripped, smeared with blood and dirt, but I walked anyway, deeper into the trees. I didn't know where I was going, only that I wasn't turning back. I figured I'd die out here eventually, but maybe that wasn't the worst end. At least it'd be mine. I found a stream by mid-morning and dropped to my knees beside it, plunging my hands into the cold water. My fingers were swollen, my wrist purple from where Reed Banner had grabbed me. I cupped water and drank greedily, then splashed my face, trying to wash away the ache behind my eyes. It didn't work. A soft noise, a branch shifting, made me spin around. He was there again. The man from the trees stood across the stream, arms loose at his sides, face unreadable. His buckskin shirt clung to him like a second skin, and the bow over his back looked more natural than any man-made thing I'd ever seen. You follow me? I asked, voice raw. No, he said. You just keep going the wrong direction. I frowned. And what direction's right? He pointed. Away from them. I didn't ask how he knew about Reed and my father. I figured it was obvious. I looked like I'd crawled through hell and gotten spit back out. Who are you? I asked after a moment. Tona, he said simply. My people call me Red Moon. I stood slowly. You Comanche? He nodded once. I tensed, unsure what came next. Pa used to say Comanche were ruthless, ghost walkers who could gut you before you knew they were there. Then again, Pa also said he'd never sell me to a man like Reed. So, I ain't got nothing worth talking, I said. Tona's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite mockery. You think I'm a thief? I don't know what you are. He didn't reply, just turned and started walking upstream. I hesitated, then grabbed my knife and followed. We didn't speak much. The trees whispered enough for both of us. He moved like he belonged to the land, every step silent, every motion deliberate. I stumbled behind him, cursing roots and stones and the ache in my legs. After a while, we reached a small clearing where sunlight filtered through the trees, casting gold on the grass. Tona stopped beside a fallen log and gestured for me to sit. You hungry? He asked. I nodded, though I hadn't realized it until then. He pulled a pouch from his belt and handed me dried meat and something like nuts. I chewed slowly, wary, but it was real food, and it filled the pit in my stomach. You run from a wedding, he said after a while. I flinched. He bought me. With liquor. Said I'd be a wife by sunrise. My father. I stopped, jaw clenched. Doesn't matter. Tona watched me for a long moment. It does. Not to him. Not to Reed. Maybe not to anyone. It matters to you, he said. That's enough. I didn't know what to say to that. He leaned against the log, arms resting on his knees. You could keep running, or you could fight. I stared at him. What do you think I've been doing? Running isn't fighting, he said. Fighting means deciding where your story ends. I blinked, surprised by the way his words pierced through the fog in my mind. You always talk like that, I muttered. He gave the smallest of shrugs. Only when someone's listening. Something about him, his calm, his silence, got under my skin. He didn't pity me, didn't try to fix me, just offered space, like a still place in a world gone mad. Why are you helping me? I asked finally. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, because I've seen men like that before. They take what they want. They leave ruin. Sometimes it's worth standing in their way. I looked away, the knot in my throat thickening. We stayed in the clearing until the sun tilted west. Tona stood and glanced toward the ridgeline. They'll come looking again, he said. I know. You ready to keep moving? Where? Someplace safer. Not forever. Just enough. I followed him again, this time with less hesitation. We walked for hours, crossing shallow streams and ducking through bramble. Tona pointed out quiet signs, deer tracks, a broken twig, the scent of something dead nearby. He moved like the forest spoke to him, and he just listened. By dusk, we reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Smoke curled in the distance. Not ours. Not his. Not safe. He crouched beside a fallen tree, scanning the horizon. I sat beside him. You really think I can fight him? I asked. Tona didn't look at me. You already did. Didn't feel like it. You ran. You lived. That's more than some manage. Living ain't the same as freedom. No, he said softly. But it's the first step. The air grew cold, the sky burning red and purple. Somewhere an eagle called. Tona built a small fire, shielding the flame with rocks. He handed me a blanket of thick wool and took first watch. I didn't argue. I was too tired to pretend I wasn't broken. Lying there beside the fire, I watched the embers glow and fade. Tona sat still, eyes scanning the dark. He didn't speak, didn't fidget, just kept watch, steady as stone. Did you lose someone? I asked quietly. A pause. Yes. Who? My brother. How? White men raided our camp. Called it a mistake. Said they thought we were hostile. My brother was 10. My chest tightened. I'm sorry. He nodded. He wasn't the last. We fell into silence again. I stared up at the stars and thought how different they looked out here, clearer, sharper. like they didn't care who was watching. I don't remember falling asleep. When I woke, the fire was out, and the sky had softened into early morning. Tona was gone. Panic hit me like a slap. I sat up fast, heart pounding, eyes darting. Then I saw him. He stood at the edge of a ridge, bow slung low, watching the trail far below. When he turned to look at me, his face was grim. "They're coming," he said. "Reed. And others." I stood, grabbing my knife. "Then we run again." Tona shook his head. "No more running." My stomach clenched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying it's time you decide how this story ends." I stared at him, the weight of his words landing hard. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd done enough running. Maybe it was time I fought. For the first time in days, I felt something other than fear. I felt ready. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the air already stank of sweat, gun oil, and rot-gut whiskey. The outlaw camp nestled in a hollow near the river, surrounded by dying cottonwoods and mud thick as blood. Reed Banner stood at the center, a grin stitched across his filthy face, barking orders at the few men sober enough to hold rifles. His voice cut through the early morning stillness like a saw blade, harsh and gloating. "She's coming down that aisle, boys," he slurred. "Today's the day O.L. Reed gets his prize. Make sure the preacher don't get any ideas about conscience." Someone chuckled. Another burped loud enough to make a crow fly off. Inside the tattered barn, I sat on a hay bale, wrists bound in lace ribbon that smelled faintly of mold. My lip was split from a blow the night before, and the thin white dress they'd shoved me into was stained with dirt and blood. It hung off my shoulders like a costume, made to look pure. It was a cruel joke. Two of Reed's men kept watch at the door, one dozing with his shotgun across his lap, the other sharpening a knife while sneaking glances at me. "Don't you touch me," I warned when he stepped too close. He grinned, gold tooth flashing. "Wouldn't dream of it, bride." I turned away, heart pounding. My thoughts clawed at themselves, desperate for a plan, a miracle, something. But all I had were memories of Tona and the way he'd looked me in the eye and said, "It's time you decide how this story ends." I didn't even know if he was still alive. The night before, he'd said he had one last place to check, one chance to slow them down. And then he vanished into the trees like he'd never been there at all. And God help me, I'd been caught gathering water. I should have been more careful. Now outside, the men were gathering. I heard boots crunching gravel, someone strumming a broken banjo, voices rising with that drunken anticipation that always came before something awful. The preacher, a traveling man with weak eyes and a spine made of water, was bribed into officiating. I heard him stammering his way through a prayer. The barn door creaked open. Reed stepped in, cleaned up just enough to make him look worse. Hair slicked back with lard, vest buttoned over his bulging gut, and a revolver holstered on each hip. He reeked of tobacco and cheap cologne, like a corpse doused in perfume. He eyed me, head tilted. "You look good," he said. I didn't reply. He walked over, leaned down, and touched my cheek with fingers thick and scarred. I flinched. He laughed. "Don't be nervous, darlin'. Ain't like you got anywhere else to be." He untied the lace, rough but deliberate. "Come on. Folks are waitin'." I stood, legs shaky. My hands ached from being tied so long, and my ribs still hurt from the beating Reed gave me when I tried to run again last night. But I walked. Outside, the makeshift crowd gathered around a charred stump dressed as an altar. Someone had hung faded ribbons and broken wagon wheels from the trees like twisted decorations. A few women prostitutes, most likely, watched with bored expressions. One spit into the grass and lit a cigarette. I was led to the stump, where the preacher stood with a Bible in trembling hands. He avoided my eyes. Reed swaggered beside me, one hand on his gun, the other on my waist. The preacher cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved." A rifle shot cracked through the air. Silence. Then screaming. The man standing behind Reed dropped like a puppet cut from its strings, blood pouring from a hole in his throat. Panic rippled through the crowd. Reed spun, drawing both pistols. What the hell? Another shot. One of the sentries dropped, rifle tumbling from his hands. Then the forest erupted. Tona moved through the trees like lightning, silent and deadly. His bow thrummed as arrows found their targets. A man lunged for cover and was hit in the leg, tumbling into the fire pit. Screams turned to chaos. I didn't hesitate. In the madness, I yanked the preacher's Bible and hurled it into Reed's face. He roared, blinded for a second, and I ducked low, grabbing a broken bottle from the altar and driving it into the thigh of the man beside me. He screamed. Reed shot blindly. The preacher fell, blood blooming from his chest. I ran. Behind me, gunfire rattled like thunder. Smoke filled the air, burning my eyes. I heard men yelling, some in pain, some in terror. Tona's war cry cut through it all, sharp and inhuman. I darted toward the barn. I needed a weapon. Something. Anything. Inside, I found a rusted shovel and a horseshoe nailed to the wall. I pried the horseshoe free, tucked it into my waistband, and grabbed the shovel like it was a sword. Footsteps. Reed burst in, blood on his chin, eyes wild. One of his pistols smoked. "You think this ends with you running?" he growled. "You're mine. You hear me? Mine." "No," I said. He raised the gun. I swung the shovel. The metal slammed into his wrist with a sickening crack. He howled, dropping the pistol. I didn't stop. I hit him again, shoulder, ribs, face. He fell to his knees, blood pouring from his nose. "You ain't nobody's bride," I whispered. Then I kicked him square in the chest. He crumpled. Outside, the gunfire faded. The smell of cordite and blood mixed in the air. Tona appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, shirt torn and soaked in sweat. His bow was still in hand, but he looked at me, not at the dead man on the floor. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I shook my head, still panting. He nodded, stepped inside, and helped me stand straighter. We walked out together. The camp was a ruin. Bodies lay scattered among broken bottles and burned supplies. The few who'd fled left everything behind. Tona's horse stood tied near the edge, unbothered by the violence. A breeze swept through, lifting ash into the air like snow. I turned to him. "How did you find me?" He shrugged. "You left footprints. Bad ones." I laughed, then sharp and ragged. "Figures." He looked at the ruined dress, at my bruised face, and something dark flickered in his eyes. "You want to go back?" he asked. I shook my head. "There's nothing left to go back to." We stared at the rising sun together, the sky bruised orange and red. A new day, smeared with the blood of the last. "You did more than fight," he said. "You ended it." "No," I said. "I just began something else." I took one last look at the camp, at the mess of what could have been my grave. Then I walked away. Tona followed, silent as always. Neither of us looked back. The desert wind screamed across the ridge as the sun bled into the horizon, casting the land in molten gold and bruised purple. Clara adjusted the reins, her bruised hands steady as they guided the bay mare up the rise. Beside her, Tona rode with the ease of a man fused with the saddle, his eyes scanning every dip and ridge of the land ahead. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was charged, humming with unfinished truths and something sharp beneath the surface. Below, nestled in a bend of the dry riverbed, Reed Banner's last camp smoked like a slow fire refusing to die. After the blood-wetting chaos, a few of his men had escaped, regrouped, and now holed up with vengeance simmering in their guts. Clara had heard whispers from a passing trapper. Reed ain't dead, just broke, and looking to finish what he started. That was all she needed to know. They hadn't come this far to let the past claw its way back. Tona dismounted first, silent as dusk. He tied his horse to a scrub cedar, checked his weapons, a bone-handled knife, a short bow, and 2 arrows fletched in black and red. Clara slipped down beside him, the shovel strapped to her back, a reminder of what she'd already survived. She traded the tattered wedding dress for a leather vest, a simple blouse, and boots that blistered less than they bled. She looked like someone forged in fire, and in truth she was. "You sure?" Tona asked quietly. Clara nodded. "He won't stop unless I end it myself." He studied her for a long moment. There was no pity in his gaze, just a quiet respect. She wasn't a girl anymore, and he wasn't about to treat her like one. They moved downhill, two shadows bleeding into the sagebrush. Clara's heart beat in rhythm with her steps, not frantic, but hard and certain. They reached the edge of the dry riverbed and crouched behind a line of thorn bushes. Smoke curled from the remains of a cook fire. Laughter drifted out, low and mean. 5 men, all armed, and one of them was Reed Banner. His voice cut through the dusk like a blade. Don't matter if she's got the whole damn tribe behind her, she's mine. Clara's jaw tightened. One of the others laughed. You already got one leg busted and a nose bent sideways. What more she got to do to make her point? She humiliated me, Reed spat. In front of everyone. I'll carve my name into her skull before I let that stand. Clara reached for the handle of her shovel. Tona laid a hand on her wrist, not to stop her, but to steady her. We picked them off, he said, voice low. Quick. Clean. Clara shook her head. No. Leave Reed to me. Tona didn't argue. He simply nodded and melted into the dark. Seconds passed like slow thunder. Then the first arrow sang. A man dropped by the fire, the sound of his body hitting the dirt muffled by the crackle of flames. Chaos followed. Gunshots rang out, sharp and panicked. Men shouted, scattered. Another arrow flew, hitting a second man in the shoulder. He screamed, clutching the shaft as he fell. Tona emerged from the brush like a ghost, blade gleaming, eyes unreadable. He moved through the camp like a windstorm, silent, precise, unstoppable. But Clara saw only Reed. He stood near the wagon, eyes wide, revolver drawn. When he saw her, something twisted in his face, not fear. Rage. You, he snarled. She stepped into the firelight, shovel in hand. Me. Reed raised his pistol. She threw the horseshoe, tucked in her belt since the wedding, striking his wrist. The shot went wide, tearing into the wagon. Clara ran. He charged, blood running down his arm, screaming curses that cracked like lightning. They collided near the fire, and she swung the shovel with both hands. He caught the handle, yanked it from her grip, and shoved her to the ground. Thought you were tough, he hissed, looming over her. You ain't nothing but a feral little stray. Clara spat blood. Better than a dog that bites his own. Reed raised the shovel. She rolled, grabbed a burning log from a fire, and jammed it into his knee. He howled, staggered, and she sprang to her feet. He swung wildly. She ducked, drove her fist into his gut, and tackled him backward into the embers. Smoke and sparks erupted around them. He shrieked, flailing, face blistering from the heat. Clara snatched the shovel again, planted her boot on his chest, and raised it high. This is where it ends, she said. Please, he gasped. She hesitated. And then Tona was beside her, quiet, waiting. She met his gaze, then lowered the shovel. No, she whispered. Let the desert take him. She stepped back. Reed crawled, half blind and burning, into the dark. His screams faded into the wind. The fire crackled behind them, casting flickering shadows on bloodstained dirt. Tona placed a hand on her shoulder. Mercy is harder than killing. I didn't do it for him, she said. I did it for me. They stood there for a long moment. The camp was silent now. The last of Reed's men had fled, dragging the wounded and leaving the dead. Clara looked up at the stars. They seemed closer than before, brighter, bolder. Maybe they always had been. Maybe she just hadn't known how to look. She turned to Tona. What now? He tilted his head toward the open land behind them. Now you ride. Where? He smiled faintly. Wherever you want. She let that sit for a moment, the weight of it sinking in. No one had ever said that to her. Not Pa. Not Reed. Not even Mama. Wherever you want, like the world wasn't something to survive, but something to shape. She looked at the rising moon, then at the long trail ahead. You coming? She asked. Tona nodded once. If you'll have me. Clara climbed onto her mare, the saddle leather-worn but strong. She took one last look at the wreckage of her past, ash, blood, and broken men, and then turned away from it. As they rode into the night, the wind carried the scent of mesquite and something new, something free. Behind them, the fire burned out. Ahead, The horizon waited. And Clara, daughter, runaway, would-be, bride turned survivor, didn't just ride forward. She claimed it. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Some stories deserve to be heard, and some women were born to ride into legend. Rain slashed the earth like whips from the heavens. Thunder cracked the silence of the plains, each boom rolling across the sky like the voice of God himself. In the mud and shadows of a dying fire, Eliza McGraw crawled, bloodied, barefoot, belly swollen with life, and eyes wide with betrayal. She dragged herself forward, each inch a war. Her dress was torn from shoulder to hem, soaked in mud, blood, and rain. Hair once honey blonde now clung to her face like seaweed on a corpse. She gasped, choking on the cold night air. Her right hand pressed to her side where a boot had struck her ribs. Broken, probably. The world tilted, and for a moment, she lay still. She wasn't sure if she was crying anymore. The rain made it impossible to tell. It had all gone wrong so fast. 2 days ago, she'd still believed Jed might be changing. That maybe, just maybe, the man she'd married under duress had something human left in him. He'd spoken sweet that morning, kissed her cheek like it meant something. They'd ridden out to get away from the smoke of town, he'd said, just the two of them. It wasn't love, not after what he'd done, but hope was a cruel, addicting thing. She thought maybe for the baby's sake they could survive. Now she lay in the mud, ribs screaming, wrists raw from rope, blood dripping down her thigh. He'd done this. Jed, her husband. He'd robbed a bank the month before, killed a sheriff's deputy. The law was closing in. She'd beg him to stop running. He'd laughed, said a pregnant wife made a fine decoy. Then last night, he made camp beneath the cottonwoods, built a fire, kissed her neck like a man in love, and kicked her in the stomach the moment she turned her back. "You're slowing me down, Eliza," he said. "The baby, too. We had a good run, didn't we?" Then he'd taken a horse, the food, the rifle, left her there with the wolves. The wind howled, or maybe it was the coyotes again. Her hand curled over her belly, still hard, still warm. Still moving? Please, she thought. Please stay alive. She reached a twisted log and collapsed beside it, breath ragged. Darkness swam at the edges of her vision. The world smelled of wet pine and her own fear. For a moment, she considered letting go. Close her eyes. Let the cold take her. But then movement. Tiny. Barely there. A flutter beneath her palm. The baby kicked. Tears came then. Real ones. "No," she whispered. "Not yet." She pushed up, using the log for balance. Her legs trembled. Pain flashed through her side like lightning. She bit down on a scream. Step. Stumble. Step again. The plain stretched endless around her. No sign of shelter. No firelight in the distance. Just the vast belly of the night. She didn't know how long she walked. Time was no longer measured in hours or stars, but in footsteps between pain and collapse. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The wind shifted. And then, hoofbeats. She froze, body tense. Heartbeat in her ears like war drums. Was it Jed? Had he come back to finish the job? She ducked low into a cluster of shrubs, holding her breath as the sound grew louder. Fast, purposeful, not galloping, but steady. Her fingers clutched the wet branches. A shadow emerged against the horizon, mounted, tall, and wrapped in furs. A stranger. Lightning flashed, and for a second, she saw the rider clearly. A man with braids, sharp eyes, face painted in streaks of red and black. Cheyenne, she thought, heart pounding. Her mind raced with old stories told in whispers around campfires. Some true, most not. She couldn't run. Not now. The rider slowed, sensing something. His eyes swept the landscape. Eliza's knees buckled. She collapsed fully into the brush, groaning. He turned his horse toward the sound. She tried to crawl, but managed only an inch before her arms gave out. The horse stopped feet from her. A silence stretched. Then the voice, low, cautious. "You are hurt." His English was accented, deliberate. She flinched, half expecting a blade. Instead, he dismounted. She looked up into his face. Not young, not old. Scarred across the chin. eyes dark as coal, but not unkind. He knelt beside her, touched her arm. She tensed. Don't hurt me. I do not hurt women, he said. You are heavy with child. She laughed, bitter and broken. Brilliant observation. He didn't react to the sarcasm. Instead, he pressed fingers to her wrist. Her pulse was faint. He frowned, then turned, whistled sharply. From the distance came another horse, smaller, leaner. He lifted her as easily as if she were a wounded deer. Put me down, she groaned. No. Why help me? I could be trouble. You are almost dead, he replied simply. Trouble does not crawl in mud with broken ribs. She said nothing more. She didn't have the strength. The storm had eased by the time they reached the ridge. He guided the horse with ease, moving silent as smoke. Eliza's head lolled against his chest, breath shallow. She drifted in and out, visions of Jed's boots, the firelight, the snap of her own bones, each memory knifing through the fog. She came to in a tent of stitched hides, warm and smoky. Her dress had been replaced with a soft tunic, her wounds bound tight. She started to panic until she saw her belly, still full, still moving. You live, said the voice again. She turned. He sat cross-legged near the fire, sharpening a blade. The tent smelled of cedar and sage. Who are you? She asked. My name is Tessina. Where am I? A half day from death, if I had not found you. She didn't smile, but her eyes flickered. Then I suppose I owe you. You owe no one, he said, but you carry life. That must be protected. She studied him. His movements were calm, precise. There was no pity in his gaze, only observation. I don't have a name anymore, she muttered. He didn't ask questions. Didn't press. She liked that. Days passed. She healed slowly. Tessina brought herbs and boiled meat. He never lingered long, always quiet, always watchful. Eliza asked little. She didn't have the strength for stories. Not yet. But when she slept, the nightmares came. Jed's face above hers, snarling. The thud of his boot. The sound of him riding away. One night, she woke screaming. Tessina appeared moments later, blade in hand. It was just a dream, she whispered. He crouched beside her, handed her water. Dreams are memories that refuse to die. You speak like a preacher. I have killed too many men to be a preacher. That earned a dry, broken laugh. A week passed. Her ribs mended enough for movement. She walked the perimeter of the small camp, feeling sun again on her skin. The baby kicked more now, stronger. She spoke to it sometimes. Useless words. Soothing lies. You'll never meet your father, she told the bump. And that's the first gift I'll ever give you. Tessina didn't ask what happened. But one evening, as the sun bled over the mountains, she told him anyway. He left me to die, she said, voice quiet. Said I was slowing him down. He took everything and kicked me in the belly. If you hadn't found me, we'd be bones. He nodded once. Some men are beasts. I wanted to believe he could change, she whispered. That is a woman's strength. And her curse. She looked at him. What's yours? He didn't answer, just stared into the fire. That night, she dreamed of fire and wolves, of Jed's voice echoing in the darkness. But when she woke, it was to the warmth of a fire, the steady beat of a drum somewhere distant, and a strange new certainty in her heart. She was not dead, and she would never be his victim again. Not ever. In the dark, beneath a sky full of stars, the wind whispered through the trees. She listened, and for the first time, she didn't hear fear. She heard the road calling. The campfire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the leather walls of the teepee. Eliza sat cross-legged on a thick buffalo hide, her hands wrapped around a wooden bowl of broth. The scent of boiled roots and herbs drifted through the smoke. She sipped cautiously, the heat biting her cracked lips. Across from her, Tessina worked in silence, stringing a line of beads into a long cord. His hands moved with quiet certainty, every motion purposeful. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was something like peace. A rare thing. Outside, the wind hummed across the prairie. She could hear the distant sounds of movement, others nearby, faint voices speaking a language she didn't understand. She'd seen glimpses of them over the last few days. A few elders. Children who stared at her with wide, curious eyes. A woman with a braid down to her waist who brought her clean linens and strong-smelling teas. They didn't speak to her directly, but they didn't seem hostile either. She was something between a guest and a ghost. Ticina didn't hover. He didn't ask questions. But he watched, observed, protected. She was grateful for it. Grateful for the silence. Words hadn't done her much good before. Her life had been bartered in them. Promises. Lies. Oaths made with poisoned tongues. So she kept quiet and healed. Her ribs still ached. The bruises had faded to a mottled yellow, but the deeper wounds, the ones inside, still throbbed. Sometimes she woke up gasping, certain she could hear Jed's boots outside. Sometimes she forgot where she was until she saw the gentle curve of the teepee wall and smelled the clean, earthy scent of sage and firewood. It grounded her. This place. These people. Him. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally, her voice low. Ticina didn't look up. "Because you needed help. You don't know me. You were dying. That was enough." She set her bowl down. "I could have been anyone. A thief. A liar. An outlaw." He nodded. "Maybe. But you were pregnant. That makes you sacred." That word struck her like a stone. Sacred. No one had ever used it for her. Not when she was a girl dreaming of the stars beyond her tiny Kentucky town. Not when she married Jed to save her brother's life. Not even when she'd first learned she was carrying a child. She had never felt sacred. Just scared. "You live here alone?" she asked, changing the subject. "No," he said. "This is a hunting camp. I return when I need rest." "And the others?" "They don't mind a stranger. They are wary. The old stories are deep, but they see your belly. That changes things. You keep bringing that up. It matters." She wanted to argue, wanted to say she wasn't some symbol or holy vessel. But then the baby kicked again, a sharp little jab beneath her ribs, and she winced. Maybe it did matter. "I was married once," he said after a long pause. "We had a son. He died before he walked." She looked at him, surprised. It was the first piece of his past he'd offered. "I'm sorry. She died too," he added, voice steady. "Raiding party came through while I hunted. White men. Took her scalp like it was meat. My brother buried her." Eliza said nothing. The silence stretched like a wound between them. "Now I live here," he said simply. "No more village. No more blood." She could feel his pain, not in his voice, which was even, but in the way he avoided her gaze. There was something haunted in him, something she recognized. She knew that kind of grief. The kind that sat in your chest like a stone and refused to move. "I wasn't supposed to live either," she murmured. "Jed, he's the father. He's also the one who left me to die. I thought the wolves would finish me off." Ticina's jaw tightened. She continued, eyes unfocused. "He wasn't always like that. Or maybe he was, and I was too stupid to see it. My father owed him money. Jed offered to clear the debt if he gave me over. So I married him. I thought I could survive it." "You did. I survived the wrong things." He reached forward, gently took her wrist. "You're still here." The contact startled her, not because it was sudden, but because it wasn't rough. No demand. No power behind it. Just reassurance. "Still here," she repeated. Later that day, she stepped outside the teepee for the first time. The air was cool and crisp, the grass tall and gold in the sun. Children ran across the hilltops, laughing. A few glanced her way and then turned back to their games. The elder woman from before nodded at her and handed her a bundle of soft herbs. She says, "Chew these when the pain comes." Ticina translated. "They will not hurt the child." Eliza gave a small smile. "Tell her thank you." He did. That afternoon, he showed her how to use a bow. She held it awkwardly at first, arms shaking. "Relax your shoulders," he instructed. "Draw with your back, not your arms." "Do you teach all your guests this?" "You are not a guest. You are preparing." "For what?" "For when he comes." Her mouth went dry. "You think he'll come back?" she asked. "He will not leave something unfinished. Not a man like that." She looked down at her hands. Then I need a gun, not a bow. A gun is loud. Requires powder. A bow whispers. She tried again. Pulled the string. Let go. The arrow flopped to the dirt 2 feet in front of her. He didn't laugh. Just nodded. Again. By the 5th shot, she hit the hay target. By the 10th, she struck near center. Sweat ran down her back, but something else stirred in her chest, something fierce and unfamiliar. That night, she dreamed of standing in a canyon, bow in hand, the sky above streaked red. Jed was there too, reaching for her. But this time she didn't run. She didn't scream. She drew the string and let it fly. When she woke, she was smiling. In the following days, she grew stronger, walked farther, helped gather kindling, even laughed once when Tessina slipped trying to climb a rock. "You're not as graceful as you pretend to be," she teased. He raised an eyebrow. "I was testing a stone." "Sure you were." Their banter was dry, spare, but it filled the silence with something warmer than fire. One morning, a scout rode into camp at dawn. Urgent voices outside the teepee. Tessina returned with a narrowed gaze. "What is it?" she asked. "Tracks horsemen. White men. They found a camp north of here. Burned it." Her heart sank. "He's coming, isn't he?" He didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a leather bundle. Inside was a bow, 3 arrows, and a small hunting knife. She looked at him, confused. "You're giving me this now? You have healed. Now you learn." She nodded slowly. Her breath came tight. That evening, as the sun melted over the plains, she sat beside Tessina near the fire. Neither spoke for a long while. The baby kicked again, stronger than ever, and she placed a hand over her belly, protective now, not fearful. "I used to think being strong meant never crying," she said softly. "But now I think it means standing back up after you've been knocked down." Tessina nodded. "And not letting the one who knocked you down stand for long." She looked at him, surprised by the quiet threat in his voice. "You sound like you've been waiting to kill him." "I have not," he said. "But I will not let you face him alone." The fire cracked between them. She thought of Jed, of the hollow way his eyes looked when he lied, of the smell of whiskey on his breath, of the way he never looked back. She wasn't the same woman he'd left for dead. And next time, she would be the one walking away. The wind picked up, carrying smoke and the scent of rain. Far off in the distance, thunder grumbled once more. The first sign was the smoke, thin and gray, curling on the horizon like a warning. Tessina stood on the ridge with his hand over his brow, watching it with the stillness of a predator. Eliza stood beside him, her hand resting on her belly, heart thudding like distant drums. The sky above was the same wide stretch of blue. The grass still waved in the wind, but the air had changed. Tighter, tense. He didn't say anything at first, just pointed. "They're burning again." She didn't need to ask who. Only one man left a trail like that. Jed. Her stomach tightened. The baby shifted as if it, too, sensed the return of the monster. How close? Less than a day. Eliza stared at the smoke, feeling her lungs compress. All the peace of the past weeks drained away in an instant. That peace had always been borrowed time. Now the debt had come due. "We should run," she said. The words tasted wrong. Tessina didn't look at her. "We run. He finds someone else to punish. Another camp. Another family." She already knew that. Still, some part of her wanted to grab the horse and ride as far as her swollen body would allow. Not for herself, but for the child. But another part, buried deep in her bones, was tired of running. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, hand tracing slow circles over her stomach, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant whisper of grass in the wind. Tessina sat outside the teepee sharpening his knife in rhythmic motions. She could hear it, scrape, scrape, pause. Scrape again. It was a sound of certainty, a sound that said war was coming. By morning, the first body was found. A Cheyenne boy barely 13 had been sent ahead to scout the western trails. He didn't return. His father found him slumped over his pony near the creek, throat cut, eyes wide open, blood soaking the saddle. A crude note was pinned to his chest. "Tell the girl I'm coming. Tessina read it aloud without inflection. Eliza didn't cry. She couldn't. The fear in her had calcified into something harder, colder. She took the bow he'd given her and began to string it. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. The small camp shifted from peace to readiness like a sleeping beast waking for battle. Spears were sharpened. Horses were fed double. Fires burned low at night. Everyone moved with the quiet understanding of people who had seen violence before and knew it would come again. Tessina trained her harder, not with kindness, but with clarity. Draw faster. Don't flinch. Wider stance. Every mistake earned her silence, not scolding. But every small victory, a bullseye, a silent step, a proper throw, earned a nod of approval. She lived for those nods. At dusk on the 3rd day, they found tracks near the northern ridge. 4 riders. Heavy boot prints. Cigar butts. One of them had pissed on a sacred tree and carved a crude face into the bark. They're close, Tessina said. Let's end this. That night, they rode out together. Eliza wore a thick doeskin tunic over her belly and carried the bow across her back. A knife hung at her side, small but sharp. Her hands shook only once, when she looked down and remembered Jed's hands wrapped around her throat. She closed her eyes and saw the moment he kicked her into the dirt. The cold. The breath leaving her body. The sound of the horse galloping away. No, not again. They found the gangs camped tucked in a grove by the river. 4 horses tethered nearby. Saddles leaned against trees. The scent of tobacco and liquor wafted through the brush. Eliza crouched beside Tessina, staring at the flickering firelight. Jed's not with them, she said. Her voice was too steady for how loud her heart pounded. He will come soon. They waited. 10 minutes. 20. Then the sound of hooves. Jed rode in like he owned the night, boots polished, coat clean, face smirking as if the land itself bowed to him. He was leaner than she remembered, sharper in the face, but the swagger was the same. He laughed with the men, passed around a flask, tossed a stolen necklace into the fire. Tessina looked at her. Ready. She nodded. They attacked just before dawn. Tessina moved like smoke, silent, sudden, merciless. An arrow took down the first man before he could scream. The second reached for his revolver and got a blade in the neck. Eliza moved behind them, heart hammering, hands trembling on the bow. A shot rang out, Jed yelling, "They're here. It's her. Kill the squaw lover." She saw him then, across the fire, gun in hand, his eyes locked on hers. He smiled. "Well, look at that," he said, voice loud, cruel. "You didn't die after all." He raised the pistol. She dropped and rolled. The shot missed by inches, bark exploding behind her. Tessina shouted something, but she was already up, moving through the trees, breath ragged. Jed followed, boots thudding, laughing. "You think you're something now, huh? Got yourself a new man? I ought to cut that baby out of you just to remind you where you came from." She ran until her lungs burned, until the forest thinned and the river glittered ahead. Then she stopped, turned. He stepped into view, gun raised. "No more games," he said. "You're right." She raised the bow. He laughed. "You're gonna shoot me? Like that? Barefoot and knocked up." The arrow flew. It struck his shoulder. High, not fatal, but enough to twist him sideways. He screamed and fired wildly. She ducked. Pain ripped across her thigh. Not deep. A graze. He charged, screaming. She drew the knife. They collided like thunder. He grabbed her hair, slammed her against a tree, fist smashing into her cheek. She stabbed wildly, once, twice, one hit, one miss. Blood soaked into her tunic. He shoved her down, straddled her, fists raining down. "I made you," he roared. "I own you." She jammed the knife upward with both hands, straight into his gut. His mouth fell open. She twisted. He fell off her, gasping, clutching the wound. His blood painted the grass. She crawled away, coughing, dizzy. Tessina burst through the trees moments later, bow raised. He saw her, then Jed. Jed looked up at him, laughing weakly. "She did it," he rasped. "You're a little woman." Eliza stood, bloody and shaking. "Not your woman," she said. She raised the bow one last time. The arrow hit him between the eyes. Jed McGraw didn't make another sound. Later, they burned the bodies. The smoke rose high and bitter into the morning sky. Eliza sat by the river, hands stained, muscles trembling. The baby kicked again, strong and steady. She placed her hand over it. "You're safe now," she whispered. Tessina crouched beside her. "It is finished," he said. She didn't reply right away, just stared at the fire, watching the past burn. "No," she said softly. "It's just beginning." The flames had long died out, but the smoke lingered, thin trails curling into the dawn like ghosts. Eliza stood barefoot in the river, washing blood from her hands. Her reflection stared back, bruised but unbroken, eyes darker than she remembered. Behind her, the embers of Jed McGraw's pyre smoldered, the last of his cruelty dissolving into ash. She dipped her hands again, the cold water numbing her fingers. Each ripple distorted the face in the water, but even with the warping waves, she saw something she hadn't seen in years: herself. Tessina watched her from the bank, silent as ever. He'd stood beside her in battle, in silence, in the aftermath. He hadn't spoken of the kill, hadn't praised her or pitied her. That was the deepest respect. He let her own the moment. She stepped out of the water, her legs shaky, her thigh still aching from the graze. He offered his hand. She didn't take it, not because she didn't want to, but because she needed to feel the ground beneath her feet, unassisted, just once. They walked back toward the camp without speaking. The sun had begun to rise, casting long golden streaks through the grass. It should have felt like an ending. The villain dead, the danger past. But Eliza felt no such thing. Not yet. When they reached the teepee, she sat beside the fire and held her belly. The baby kicked, strong, alive, relentless. She smiled slightly. Not from joy, not entirely. From defiance. Her child had survived Jed's boots, the wilderness, hunger, gunfire. That wasn't luck. That was something stronger. Tessina handed her a fresh cloth, damp with herbs. She placed it on the bruise blooming along her cheekbone. It stung, but she welcomed the pain. It meant she was still here. "He'll be buried in that place forever," Tessina said quietly. "No one will disturb it." "Good," she said. "Let the earth forget him." But she wouldn't. Not fully. Not yet. Jed would live in the scars on her ribs, in the nightmares she would likely carry for years. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant living anyway. That night, the people of the camp gathered, not to celebrate, but to mark a passage. Elders lit sage and whispered prayers into the smoke. Drums beat low and steady like a second heartbeat. Eliza sat among them, surrounded but not smothered. A place had been made for her. Not by words, not by declaration, by fire and blood and survival. A woman, older, eyes like river stones, placed a hand on Eliza's stomach and whispered something in Cheyenne. Eliza didn't understand, but she nodded anyway. She understood the feeling. "You have made them proud," Tessina said later as they sat beside the outer fire, just the two of them. "I didn't do it for them." "No, but they recognize truth when they see it." Eliza looked at him. The firelight played across his face, softened the sharp edges. She saw the scar along his chin, the old pain in his eyes. But also something new. Respect. Maybe even admiration. She swallowed. "You've lost more than I can imagine." He didn't answer. "But you still chose to help me, when it would have been easier to walk away. I saw someone worth saving." "You didn't know that then." He turned to her, expression calm. "I knew enough." They sat in silence again, but this one was different, comfortable, filled with things that didn't need saying. The fire crackled. The stars watched. As the days passed, her body mended. The wound in her leg closed. The bruises faded. The tension in her shoulders slowly began to release. She walked further, helped gather herbs, learned to bind wounds. The people didn't treat her like an outsider anymore. Children ran past her without staring. The old woman gave her a carved talisman for the baby's safe arrival. Tessina taught her how to skin rabbits, how to read the tracks of elk, how to listen to the wind like it had a voice. One morning, They rode together to the top of a high ridge. The world stretched out before them, open, wild, endless. She stared at it, heart full of something she couldn't name. "Everything feels new," she said softly. "It is. But I don't know where I fit in it." "You are alive," he said. "You already fit." She turned to him, suddenly full of emotion. "I used to think surviving was all there was, just getting through each day. And now I think maybe there's more." A wind rose over the ridge, tugging at their hair, their clothes. He reached out then, not to help her, not to save her, but to simply hold her hand. She let him. The months that followed passed quietly, but not idly. She grew rounder, heavier. Her muscles firmed. Her laugh returned, hesitant at first, then fuller. She learned the names of the plants, the stories in the stars. She spoke more of her past, but only when she chose to. And he listened, never interrupting. The birth came on a stormy night. Rain pounded the teepee roof, thunder shook the earth, but inside, the fire burned warm and strong. The elder women gathered around her, guiding her with gentle, firm hands. Tessina stood outside, waiting, the storm washing over him. She screamed. She bled. She nearly broke. But then a cry, sharp, loud, alive. The baby was placed in her arms, swaddled and blinking, red-faced and perfect. A boy. She cried then. Not from pain, from release. Tessina entered only when beckoned. He knelt beside her, gazed down at the child. "He is strong," he said. "He had to be." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "We're naming him Caden. It means he who rises." He nodded slowly. "It fits." She leaned her head back against the furs, exhaustion washing over her. But behind it was peace. Days later, as she held her son beneath the open sky, she thought of the girl who had been left in the mud to die. The girl who had crawled through blood and storm, who had felt death's breath on her neck and refused to surrender. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman reborn in fire and fury, who had taken back her story one arrow, one step, one breath at a time. She looked out over the plains, the wind stirring the grass like waves on an ocean. "I am not what he made me," she whispered to her child. "I am what I chose to become." The fire behind her roared. The people gathered once more, singing the birth songs, offering blessings. There was no priest, no written record, just smoke, stars, and stories. Eliza McGraw was no longer a name tied to a man's crime. She was legend now, and legends didn't beg for mercy. They made the world remember them. The night drew on, filled with laughter and music. Somewhere beyond the ridge, wolves howled. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She looked at Tessina beside her, at the firelight dancing in his eyes, and at the boy in her arms. Her family, her future. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.